The cafeteria went silent in the way that only institutional spaces can. A silence so heavy it pressed against the walls, against the fluorescent lights humming overhead, against every breath held in anticipation of what would happen next. A lunch tray spun on the linoleum floor, mashed potatoes and gravy spreading like spilled paint across the white tiles. Standing over it was Amara Thompson, 17 years old, her shoulders squared, but her hands trembling at her sides. 3 students, Brad Whitmore, Chelsea Harrington, and Tyler Brooks, formed a loose semicircle around her, their faces twisted into expressions that lived somewhere between amusement and cruelty. Brad's foot was still extended from the trip. He made no effort to hide it. "Oops," he said, loud enough for the entire cafeteria to hear. His voice carried the practiced ease of someone who had never faced consequences. "Guess you should watch where you're walking, scholarship girl." The words hung in the air like smoke. Around them, students pulled out phones. Some filmed openly. Others whispered to their neighbors, eyes wide with the kind of excitement that comes from watching someone else's humiliation. No one moved to help. No one told Brad to stop. No one did anything at all. Amara's eyes swept the room slowly, methodically, searching for something. One teacher, one ally, one single person who might step forward and say this wasn't right. She found faces turned away. She found the lunch monitor, Mrs. Brennan, deliberately looking at her clipboard. She found the cameras of 24 phones pointed at her like accusatory fingers. She found nothing that looked like justice. Her hands trembled harder, but she bent down to pick up her tray. The gravy had soaked into the knee of her jeans, her only clean pair this week. She could feel it, cold and sticky against her skin. Chelsea stepped closer, her designer sneakers squeaking on the wet floor. "You gonna cry?" she asked, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Are you gonna get back in line like a good little—" "That's enough." Amara's voice was quiet. So quiet some people in the back couldn't hear it. But those close enough felt it. Felt the weight of it, the steel underneath the softness. She stood slowly, the tray forgotten on the floor. She straightened her spine, rolled her shoulders back, and looked Brad Whitmore directly in his pale blue eyes. Brad leaned in, close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne his father bought him. "Or what?" he asked, grinning. The cafeteria held its breath. Amara said nothing. She didn't blink, didn't look away, didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. But something in her silence, something in the absolute stillness of her gaze, made Brad step back. Just an inch, just enough to break the spell. Tyler laughed nervously. "Man, she's weird." But that moment, that choice to stay silent when every cell in her body screamed to fight back, was only the beginning of a reckoning no one saw coming. 6 hours earlier, Amara had woken to the sound of her mother's cough from the next room. The walls of their apartment were thin as paper, cheap drywall that transmitted every sound, every sickness, every struggle. She'd pulled on 2 sweaters, one blue, one gray, both threadbare at the elbows, and her only pair of clean jeans. In the living room, her younger brother Jamal slept on the couch, 9 years old and small for his age, his comic books scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. She'd made oatmeal for 3 in their dented pot, packed 2 lunches in reused paper bags, kissed her mother's forehead, feeling the fever there and pretending not to notice because they couldn't afford another doctor's visit this month. "You don't have to do all this, baby," her mother had whispered, her voice rough as sandpaper. "I know, Mama. But I want to." Amara hadn't just gotten into Westbrook Prep Academy. She'd earned it. Full scholarship, perfect grades, an essay about breaking cycles, and building futures that had made the admissions director cry. She remembered the acceptance letter, how she'd read it 17 times, how the words had glowed on the page. You represent the best of what education can achieve. She'd thought it meant she belonged. She'd been wrong. At Westbrook, there were two types of students, and the division was clearer than any line drawn in sand. There were legacy kids, children whose last names appeared on building plaques, whose grandparents had walked these same marble hallways, whose futures were guaranteed by trust funds and family connections. And there were scholarship kids, students who worked weekends and studied until closing time at the library, who carried the weight of their family's hopes on their shoulders like Atlas carrying the sky. Amara worked checkout at Save Mart every Saturday and Sunday. She studied in the library until the janitor gently reminded her it was time to leave. She never complained, never asked for extensions, never drew attention to the differences between her world and theirs. But every day, she felt it in the way teachers' eyes would skip over her raised hand, felt it in the way group projects somehow always filled up before she could join, felt it in the silence that fell when she entered a room, and the conversations that resumed only after she'd passed. She'd thought if she stayed quiet, stayed excellent, stayed invisible except when it mattered, she'd be safe. 2 weeks before the cafeteria incident, Brad had accidentally knocked her books off her desk during European history. All 6 of them, hardbound textbooks she'd borrowed from the library because she couldn't afford to buy them, had crashed to the floor with a sound like thunder. Chelsea had laughed, a high tinkling sound that reminded Amara of breaking glass. Tyler had filmed it on his phone. The teacher, Mr. Harrison, had seen it happen. He'd looked right at Brad, right at the smirk on his face, and had said absolutely nothing. Amara had picked up her books in silence, spine by spine, her cheeks burning. There had been one person Amara thought she could trust. Maya Jenkins was the only other black girl in their grade, and when Amara had first arrived at Westbrook, she'd felt a surge of hope at seeing her. But Maya came from money, old money, the kind that opened doors before you even knocked. Maya fit in at Westbrook the way a key fits a lock, smooth and natural and without resistance. Last week, Amara had been in the bathroom when Maya and 2 other girls had entered, laughing about something. She'd frozen in the stall, not wanting to interrupt, planning to wait until they left. "I mean, I get it," Maya had said, her voice carrying easily over the running water. "Scholarships are nice and all. Diversity is important. But some people just don't vibe with the culture here, you know? They don't fit." The other girls had agreed enthusiastically. Amara had stayed in that stall for 10 minutes after they left, staring at the graffiti on the door, feeling something inside her chest crack and reform into something harder. She'd never spoken to Maya again. Now, sitting alone in the corner of the cafeteria, Amara tried to eat the sandwich she'd packed that morning. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The bread tasted like sawdust in her mouth. Around her, conversations had resumed, life moving on as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just been humiliated in front of 200 witnesses. Brad walked by her table. He moved with the lazy confidence of someone who had never been told no, never been denied, never been made to feel small. He paused beside her, reached into his pocket, and dropped a crisp dollar bill onto her table. "For the mess," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You people are good at cleaning, right?" The laughter that followed was like gasoline on fire. Amara's jaw tightened. Every muscle in her body tensed. For a moment, she sat perfectly still, breathing through her nose, counting to 10 the way her mother had taught her. Then she picked up the dollar bill, stood up, walked over to Brad Whitmore's table where he sat surrounded by his friends, and placed the bill directly in front of him. "Keep it," she said, her voice steady as a drumbeat. "You'll need it more than me when this is over." Brad's smile vanished like smoke in wind. By the end of lunch period, the video was everywhere. It had been edited with the kind of casual malice that social media enables, cut and rearranged to tell a different story. The edited version showed Amara standing over Brad, her face set in anger, her words cut out entirely. The caption read, "Angry scholarship girl threatens student." The comments flooded in like a toxic tide. "She's so aggressive. Why is she even here?" Typical. And worse. So much worse that Amara turned off her phone after reading just 3 of them, her stomach twisting into knots. But the damage was already done. The next morning, she was called to the principal's office. Principal Douglas sat behind his massive oak desk, like a judge behind a bench. The office smelled of leather and old books, and the kind of wood polish that costs $40 a bottle. Brad, Chelsea, and Tyler sat in chairs across from him, each with a parent standing behind them like sentinels. Brad's mother wore pearls. Chelsea's father wore a suit that cost more than Amara's rent. Tyler's parents both wore expressions of righteous indignation. Amara sat alone. "Miss Thompson," Principal Douglas began, steepling his fingers in that way administrators do when they've already made up their minds. "We've received serious complaints about threatening behavior." "I didn't threaten anyone," Amara said. "We have video evidence." "That video is edited." Brad's mother leaned forward, her pearls clicking together. "Are you calling my son a liar?" The silence that followed felt like drowning. Principal Douglas sighed, a heavy exhale that suggested weariness, though Amara suspected it was mostly theater. "Amara, Westbrook values respect and decorum above all else. We have a reputation to maintain. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a school better suited to your background." The word hung in the air like a blade. "You're not even going to investigate?" Amara's voice cracked on the last word. "We have investigated. This meeting is a courtesy." Amara stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "Then this conversation is over." She walked out of that office with her head high, but the moment she cleared the hallway, the moment she pushed through the heavy front doors and stood on the marble steps of Westbrook Prep Academy, she finally let herself cry. Not soft tears, but the kind that shook her whole body, that came from somewhere deep and primal and broken. Through her tears, though, a thought formed, clear as crystal, sharp as a knife. "They think I'm powerless," she thought. "They're wrong." That night, Amara didn't sleep. She sat at her mother's old laptop, the one with the cracked screen and the fan that sounded like a dying animal, and she started digging. She pulled up Westbrook's policies, the zero-tolerance harassment policy, the anti-discrimination clause, the diversity statement that promised equity and respect for all students. She researched Brad's father's company and found article after article about discriminatory hiring practices. She mapped out the school's donor list and found names that appeared again and again, families that had built Westbrook's wealth on the backs of businesses that had profited from inequality. And then she found something else, something that made her heart hammer in her chest. The cafeteria had security cameras, full footage, unedited, time-stamped and archived. The school had never bothered to check them, but Amara would. She approached Mr. Okafor the next day after his history class. He was the only black teacher at Westbrook, a quiet man who taught about civil rights with a passion that suggested personal experience. He was packing his briefcase when she knocked on his classroom door. "I need your help," she said without preamble. Mr. Okafor looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw recognition, not of her face, but of her situation, her fight, her exhaustion. "What do you need?" he asked. "Access to the cafeteria security footage." He paused, his hand frozen on the clasp of his briefcase. "That could cost me my job." "I know." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "When do we start?" They met after school in the administrative office, in a small room where the security feeds were stored. Mr. Okafor pulled up the footage with hands that trembled slightly. They watched in silence. The full video was damning, crystal clear. No ambiguity. Brad deliberately extending his foot. Amara's tray flying. Chelsea's mocking laughter caught perfectly by the microphone. Tyler filming and laughing. And there, in the corner of the frame, Mrs. Brennan looking directly at the incident and walking away. "We go public," Amara said, her voice steady now, all tears burned away by righteous fury. Mr. Okafor shook his head. "The school will bury it. They'll discredit you. They have lawyers, money, power. Then we don't go to the school. We go to the school board. We go to the media. We make it impossible to ignore." Mr. Okafor smiled then, sad and proud at once. "You remind me of my daughter. What happened to her? She fought. She won. And she never looked back." 1 week later, the Westbrook School Board convened for their monthly meeting. Usually, these meetings were sparsely attended. Just bureaucrats and the occasional parent complaining about parking or cafeteria food. Tonight, the room was packed. Every seat filled. People standing along the walls. Local news cameras in the back. Amara walked in with her mother beside her, wearing her best dress, the same one she'd worn to her scholarship interview. Mr. Okafor walked behind them, and beside him, a woman in a sharp gray suit. Ms. Langston, a civil rights attorney, who had taken Amara's case pro bono after reading about it in the community forum. Brad's family was there, seated in the front row. Principal Douglas sat with his arms crossed. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The board president, an older white man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "We'll begin with public comment." Amara stood. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She looked out at the sea of faces, some sympathetic, some hostile, most just curious. She placed her hands on the podium to keep them from shaking, and she spoke. For 7 minutes, she told the truth. Not yelling, not crying, just speaking clearly and calmly, painting a picture with words of what it felt like to be invisible until you were a target, to be ignored until you were a problem, to be told you were valued until it became inconvenient. She described the cafeteria incident in detail, the principal's office, the edited video, the system that had failed her at every turn. Then she nodded to Mr. Okafor. He pressed play on the laptop. The security footage played on the projector screen, 20 feet wide, impossible to ignore. The room went absolutely silent. Brad's mother gasped audibly. Principal Douglas stared at the floor. One of the board members covered her mouth with her hand. When it ended, Chelsea's father, who sat on the school board, stood up. "This is clearly a misunderstanding." "No," Amara interrupted, her voice cutting through his like a knife through water. "It's not." She pulled out a stack of printed documents and handed them to Ms. Langston, who distributed them to the board members. "Westbrook's harassment policy, the anti-discrimination clause you all signed, the mission statement that promises equity and respect for all students." She paused, looked directly at the board president. "You wrote those words. I'm asking you to honor them." Silence fell like a curtain. Then someone in the back row started clapping. A woman Amara didn't know, maybe a parent, maybe just someone who believed in justice. Then another person joined, and another. Within seconds, half the room was standing, applause washing over the board like a wave. The board voted unanimously. Brad, Chelsea, and Tyler were suspended pending a full investigation. Mrs. Brennan was placed on administrative leave. Principal Douglas was asked to resign, effective immediately. And Amara was offered a formal, public apology. But she didn't accept it. Not yet. "I'll accept your apology," she said, standing at that podium with cameras flashing, "when you create a real accountability system. when you hire more diverse staff, when you ensure no other student has to fight this hard just to be heard. The board president nodded slowly. We'll do better. You will, Amara said, because I'll be watching. 3 months later, Westbrook had changed. Slowly, imperfectly, but visibly. There was a new diversity council with actual power, mandatory training for all staff, a student ombudsman program, and Amara's face was on the cover of the local magazine. The student who refused to be silenced. One afternoon, studying in the library, someone sat down across from her. Maya Jenkins. Her eyes were red-rimmed. I'm sorry, Maya said, her voice small and fragile. I should have stood with you. Amara looked up from her book. She studied Maya's face for a long moment, seeing genuine regret there, genuine shame. I know, she said finally. Can we start over? Amara thought about it, about forgiveness and grace, and the cost of holding grudges. We can try, she said. That night, sitting on their worn couch with her mother, Amara asked, Are you proud of me, Mama? Her mother took her hand, held it between both of hers. Baby, I've been proud of you. Every single day. Even when you were scared, especially then. Amara leaned into her mother's shoulder, feeling the weight of the past months finally begin to lift. I was so tired, Mama. I know, baby. But now you're free. Walking through Westbrook's halls now, Amara noticed the difference. People nodded, smiled. Some even said hello. She wasn't invisible anymore. But more than that, she wasn't afraid. One morning, she opened her locker to find a note on lined paper. Thank you for fighting. You gave me courage. A friend. She didn't know who wrote it, but she knew it wouldn't be the last. Respect is not given like a gift, freely offered to all who ask. Respect is earned through action, through integrity, through the courage to stand when standing costs something. But dignity is different. Dignity is yours from birth, woven into the very fabric of your being. And no one, no bully, no system, no silence can take it from you unless you let them. Amara Thompson didn't let them. She stood when standing seemed impossible. She fought when fighting seemed futile. She won not because she was fearless, but because her fear didn't own her. And that is the difference between survival and strength, between being broken and being forged. Justice delayed is not always justice denied, not when someone refuses to stop demanding it. And sometimes, the quietest voice in the room becomes the one that changes everything. Not through volume, but through truth. Not through anger, but through unwavering dignity. That is the lesson. That is the light. And that is why stories like Amara's matter, because they remind us that power doesn't always look like power, and strength doesn't always sound like shouting. And sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear.